Hello campers, Dr. Dickey here. Okay, it's about time I made a new video. Haven't made one in about a month. What have I been doing? Well, I've been processing cells is what I've been doing. I've had about 3,000 cells that I needed to process total. And so I've been trying to finish those up. And that's what this video is going to be about. It won't be a long video, but I want to cover how to properly process cells as opposed to the way I did it, which again, remember, I'm going to try to give you the benefit of my ignorance. So hopefully I'm going to finish up processing cells in the next week or two. I should do a video in a week or two about setting up the welder that I'm going to use to weld the fuses onto the packs that I build, and then eventually get to building the packs maybe in 2 or 3 weeks or a month from now. I can start putting my packs together, which is just the first step in doing everything I need to get done. And I'll bring you along for all that. So let's go through. As opposed to what I did. What I did was I got the packs, I cut them over like you said, I immediately charged them up and capacity tested them. And capacity test them how you put them into, I used Opus. First time I did Liticala, I think I had one of those. I used that. What it does, it charges it up to full voltage, which for an 18650 cell is about 4.2 volts. Then it will discharge that battery at a set amperage. I used 1/2 amp. It will discharge it at 1/2 amp, which is about what the manufacturer used, about 0.2 C. It will discharge it and it will measure how long it takes to discharge it. If you know how long it takes to discharge it and you know the rate at which it's being discharged, you can figure out the amperage capacity of it in amp hours. How many amp hours does it have? Mine took about 6 hours. They're all about 2.6 to 2.7 amp hours capacity for the batteries, and they were rated for 2.6, so that's very, very good. Although Opus has a reputation for over measuring the capacity, and I think that has to do with the way it discharges the heat. It heats the cells up so you get a little extra capacity out of them. I don't know. There's discussions on the internet about that stuff. So what should I have done? Well, as we talked about in the first video, I think I went through some of the stuff. First thing you should do when you open up your packs, if you want to do your own do-it-yourself Powerwall build, first thing you should do is open the packs up, inspect all the cells for dents. Now, I had some that were obviously damaged, and I threw those out, of course. But I mean, just look for very, very slight dents. Could you use them with very slight dents? Yes, you probably could. But why take the chance? Hopefully you're buying 5, 10%, 20% excess number of cells from what you need. I bought about 3,000 I need for my battery, which is going to be a 7S 160P. That means 7 packs in series. Each pack is 160 18650 cells in parallel. I got about 3,000 cells. I need for that about 2,240, something like that. I have to do the math in my head, and I don't want to do that right now. But so I have 500, 600, 700 in excess that I can choose from. That way, bad cells, I can get rid of them. Cells that are marginal, I can get rid of. I can only use the absolute best cells from the ones I have. So, first thing you should do, check them for dents. If they have even slight dents, why take a chance? Set them aside. You can use them for some other project because they're probably okay. But for your big do-it-yourself Powerwall that could be located outside your house for safety reasons, you can't monitor it all the time, you don't want to use any cells that you think are iffy. Then you should measure the voltage and check the internal resistance. I didn't do that. I didn't have a method of checking the internal resistance. I didn't know to check the internal resistance. I didn't know that measuring the initial voltage was going to be important, because when I think it was the Liticala that I first used for the first couple of cells, I put a cell into it and it told me it was a bad cell. The voltage was too low. So I thought all of these things did that same thing. They did something where they told you whether it was a bad cell. If it's below 1 volt, it's a bad cell. Don't use it. Just get rid of it. There's no sense in taking a chance on it. If it's below 2.5 volts, then it's kind of iffy as to what it is. If you measure the internal resistance, and that's good, and then you can kind of charge it up slowly at first, and then you can charge it up and it should be okay. But if it's below 1 volt, forget about it, okay? I didn't do that. As far as I know, Any cell I put into the chargers that I saw was below 1 volt, I got rid of it. But I wasn't really paying close enough attention at first, so I don't know if there's any in my cells that are like that. I'm hoping self-discharge would show those up, and I did have a few cells that the self-discharge, I got rid of them. I'll explain what that is in a little bit. But for the most part, I don't know. For maybe the first half, 3/4 of the cells I processed, I didn't really know well enough what I was doing. I watched some videos, and they said, well, you got to capacity test them. Well, there's a lot more to do before you capacity test them. Look for dents. Take those out. Check the IR, check the initial voltage. If it's above 1 volt, below 2.5, mark it. That's another thing. You should actually keep a log of all your cells when you're doing them every time. What's the initial voltage? What was the initial internal resistance? What voltage did it get charged up to? Why? Because when it comes to build your battery pack, any ones that were between 2.5 and 1, well, if you don't have to use them, you don't want to use them, even if they may be good. If you don't have to use them, if you have enough cells that you don't have to put those into your do-it-yourself Powerwall, don't do that. So you want to keep a log, you want to keep a record, number all your batteries, and keep track of it. I didn't do any of that because I didn't know. You should know that, and you should do that. All right, so we've got the internal resistance, we've got the initial voltage. Now you can capacity test them. You can charge them up, and then you can discharge them. Then you can charge them back up again. Now you take them, you set them aside for 30 days, and then you measure the voltage. If they're charged back up, they should be to 4.2. Over 30 days, they should not drop below 4.15. They should not go more than 0.05 volts down from where they were initially after 30 days. Why? Because otherwise they would be known as a self-discharger. They're self-discharging, there's some problem inside the battery. You don't want to mess with them. Why take a chance with them? Okay? Fortunately, after I did my capacity testing, I put all the cells, I separated them out into the bins, and you'll see the bins in a little bit. I showed them to you before, but we'll look at them again. Then, when I realized all this stuff that I was supposed to do, I made sure that the last cell I went in there, I waited a month. And then I checked the voltage on all the cells that I had done, 1,000 some cells. So for those cells, some of them were 4 months after they've been charged, some of them were only a month, some of them were 3, 2, anywhere in between. But all those cells came in, and well, except for a few that were self-dischargers that were below like 4.13 volts, all of those came in higher than 4.15 volts, even if it was 3 or 4 months old. So that makes me feel good about those cells, except I wish I knew that they were what the voltage was initially on them, because I found out afterwards, like I said, I thought all the chargers would tell you whether it was a bad cell. I found out the MyBoxer that I was using, if you put a cell in and it's below 2 volts, it will simply assume it's a nickel-cadmium battery and a nickel metal hydride battery of some sort, and it will start charging it up, thinking it's a nickel metal hydride. Once it gets above 2.5, it now realizes it's lithium ion, and it will charge them up the rest of the way. Well, that's kind of okay, as long as they're not below 1 volt, and I don't think any cells I put in were below 1 volt. I'm 99% sure that anytime I saw ones that were below 1 volt, I just threw them away. I took them out and put them in the bad bin. But I wasn't paying enough attention to be absolutely confident about that. So make sure you benefit from my ignorance. Again, things I did wrong. So I don't know. I'm trusting that measuring the internal resistance now that I did, the self-discharge and everything else, that the batteries I had, the cells that I have, the 18650 cells I'm using, are safe to be able to do that, but I'm not positive about that. So now you capacity test them, you let them sit for 30 days, you check their voltage at that point, make sure they're not self-dischargers. Oh, one other thing, and I did this somewhat, but again, I wasn't paying as attention initially. When you're charging them back up after you have capacity tested them and their discharge, if you're charging them up at a rate of less than 1 volt, at 1 amp, and even if you're charging them at 1 amp, put your hand on them, okay? When they get about halfway charged, 3/4 of the way charged, or right before the end when they're charged, put your hand on them. None of them should be hot. You don't want any heaters. Now, measuring internal resistance should give you that. As I said, The initial internal resistance on my cells, I used the LG M26 cells, should have been under 40 milliohms. All the ones I kept were, I think I had maybe 2 or 3 that were above 40 milliohms. A really small number of them. After they're fully charged, the internal resistance will change a tiny bit for between being fully charged and being discharged down to 2 volts or so, or even less. They were all around somewhere between 33 and say 37. None of them were above 37, I don't think, of the cells I checked, which meant they were all good for internal resistance. If the internal resistance is good, highly unlikely you'll get any heaters, what they call heaters, batteries that heat up. That is, they're heating up because their internal resistance is so high that they're dissipating the energy being put in as heat because of the resistance across the battery. All right, so the process. Break open your packs. Check them for any damage. Check them for any dents. Even if it's a little slight dent, why take a chance? Then go ahead and measure the internal resistance, the initial voltage. If they're below 1 volt, toss them out. If they're above 2.5, just put them in your capacity testers and go, go, go. If they're between 1 and say 2.5, you may want to mark those so you know which ones they are, and then slowly charge them up to about 2.5, 3 volts, and then you can go ahead and process them. But mark them so you know. That way when you build your battery pack, if you don't have to use those cells that were below 2.5 volts, don't use those cells, especially ones that get closer to 1 volt. If it's 1.97, that's probably going to be okay, as opposed to something that goes down to 1.1 volts or something like that. Then you want to mark it because you want to make sure that you don't have to, if you don't have to use them, you don't use them. I didn't do any of that. I'm hoping that the testing and everything I did afterwards will show me any cells that were bad, but I don't know. So one of the things, check for heaters. When you build your packs, you always want to monitor your packs. You want to test them and check them all the time. Check them with a FLIR camera to see whether anything's getting hot in there. You want to look out for those heaters. You want to look out for balancing. I'll get into all that when I build my packs. Right now, let's go through sort of how I process things.
Okay, this is basically the setup I use to process my cells. I had 2 opuses, or OPI, as it should be, I guess, and each one takes 4 cells. The OPI would take the cells from fully charged, it would discharge them at a certain amperage rate, and it would measure the amount of time it takes to discharge at that amperage, and therefore it could calculate out what the capacity of the cells were. First they had to be charged, so I fully charged them in this MyBoxer, which would take 8 cells. Then I transfer them to the OPI and begin the discharging test. When they were done, and they went from 4.2 volts down to about 2.9 volts, I would then take them out of the OPI and put them into this MyBoxer, which would then charge them back up to full capacity. After they were charged to full capacity, the next step was to have them sit for about 30 days. So what I did was I took the batteries that had been processed that day, and I could usually do around 20 batteries a day. I should have been able to do 24 because each step was about 6 hours, but I could really realistically get 20 done in a day, unless I wanted to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and start another batch or whatever, which I rarely did. So what I did was I put them in these plastic bags, and then they would sit. I had 4 rows of 7 plastic bags each originally, and so they would sit for 30 days, and then I would open up the bags and I would check the voltage on the batteries, and I wanted to make sure that it had not decreased by more than 0.05 volts. Fully charged 4.2, usually they were more like 4.195 or so. And then after 30 days I tested them, and almost all the batteries really showed up as being about 4.17, so about 0.03, 0.025 volts drop, which meant they were not self-discharging, which is very important. That, and of course the IR measurement that we do in the beginning, is very, very good in getting rid of potentially self-discharging cells and heaters both. So how many have I processed? Well, I've got all of these done, and then these are all full of batteries as well. So that's about my 3,000 cells. Once I get these done and processed, measure the final voltage, I'll be ready to start building up my cells and building up my packs for my batteries. And that then will involve welding, and we'll do a video about that. Okay, cells, packs, and finally a battery. And the battery has cells in it, or a pack has cells in it, and then there's so many packs to make a battery. That's just the terminology I'm using. This is what I've come up with. This is my 160p configuration. I've got bus bars going across it. This will hold 150 cells, and then the bus bars come up, and so I can put these next to each other, and then the bus bars would be hooked together for series. And they won't be able to touch other than where I hook them together, because I've built these. They actually come from cake extensions. There's something to build a layer cake. You put these tubes in there, and I cut them off and got them set up with these end caps. And so this will just keep them just from touching, and I can put them in there safely and move them around without having to worry about them touching or shorting out, even though these two will be hooked together. And of course the next one. The difficulty of this, doing it like this, because of where I'm going to put them on a shelf in a cabinet, and I'll show you that next week, only because the weather is so bad today. I don't want to go out to the shed and try and do it. It won't be light enough and all kinds of other problems. So I'll show you that in the next video when we do the welding setup. But for this, I'm going to do this configuration because it'll fit better in the cabinet I have built for it to go into. And the problem is that these are handed. That is, there is one like this and one like that, and you can see they're not the same. If I turn this around, I don't get this on this side, no matter what I do. So I have to build 7 of them one way and 7 of them the other way, so that they can go in series, one after another, one after another, one after another. I've got to make sure that they're coming out correctly for positive and negative to be able to do it right. That's the handedness, is the positive and negative. I have to do that correctly. These, I think, will work out really well, keep them from touching each other, and that's my proposed pack. So what do I have to do? Well, I've made up maybe 14 or 15 of these bus bars. I've got to make up a whole bunch more, because I need a total of 28 bus bars, 2 on each pack, 14 packs, 28, plus I'll usually build a spare pack. So I'll make that an even 30 I'll have to make of these bus bars, and I've only got maybe, I don't know, 10 of them done or something like that. So I've got a bunch more of those to make up. I have to process a lot of these, and then I'll have everything ready to start doing the creation of the packs. For my welding, I'm going to use a Maltrix welder, which I've got. I have to, and I've just got the batteries for it that are these high output Turnigy batteries. They're at about 12 volts, and they can put out a huge discharge to be able to use for this welding process. So I'll get that kind of straightened up, and I'll figure out exactly how to do the welding and what values I need and everything in the next video.